Welcome to the deep dive. Are you ready for this? We're about to explore India, a land of ancient traditions and, surprisingly, a global leader in something you might not expect. The milk revolution.
Yes, that's right. We're going deep into the world of small-scale dairy farming in India, and we're uncovering the often unsung heroes of this industry, women.
70% of the dairy workforce there being women. That's a statistic that really caught my eye. It's huge. I have so many questions, especially considering how vital the dairy industry is to India's economy.
Absolutely. The significance of it all, though, really starts to make sense when you consider the historical context. India has an 8,000-plus year history of cattle domestication, deeply interwoven with their culture and religion. That reverence for cows is a big part of why India is the world's top milk producer today.
It's fascinating to me that even with such a massive bovine population, India's focus is mainly on meeting its own needs, and their per capita consumption of milk is even higher than the global average. It makes the role of women in this industry even more interesting to think about. What's their experience actually like?
Well, you have to remember that roughly 70% of dairy farmers in India are either landless or work on a very small scale.
Hmm.
We're often talking about just one or two cows. And here's where it gets really interesting. 80 to 90% of the work involved in raising those animals is done by women.
So it's much more than just milking, I'd imagine.
Oh, absolutely. They handle a whole range of tasks. We're talking everything from harvesting fodder, feeding, caring for calves, cleaning, and even producing dung cakes for fuel.
Dung cakes. That's not something you hear about every day. What are those?
It's a traditional biofuel, really. They're a great example of how resourcefulness and tradition are very much alive in these farming practices.
That's incredible. But going back to the women themselves, they're doing all this work. What does it actually mean for them on a personal level?
That's a crucial point. For a lot of these women, owning even a single cow can be incredibly empowering. It gives them a level of status, income, and independence that's often really hard to come by otherwise, especially when you think about land ownership.
It's like giving them a stake in their own future.
Precisely. And this isn't just anecdotal, by the way. The World Bank did a study on Operation Flood, which was India's national dairy development program. And they found a direct link between women's involvement in dairy farming and a boost in their economic well-being.
So Operation Flood is something worth digging into further, wouldn't you say?
Definitely. It was a total game changer for India's dairy industry, shifting them from reliance on imports to becoming the biggest milk producer globally.
It's amazing to think that something as seemingly simple as owning a cow can have such a huge positive ripple effect. Speaking of positive impacts, I understand that dairy cooperatives have played a pretty significant role in supporting these women.
That's right, they have. Cooperatives give them access to markets, make sure they get fair prices for their milk, and often focus on the socioeconomic development of women.
One of the things that really stood out to me was this idea that women often have a stronger emotional connection with their cows.
Yes, they see them as family, practically. And that connection, it leads to a deeper understanding of the cow's behavior and needs, which naturally means better care for the animals. There are even some studies that suggest this bond can lead to higher milk yields, too.
So it's more than just practicality, it's about genuine care. I'd love to hear more about this shift towards women-led cooperatives.
That's a fascinating area. There's a growing understanding that moving away from the traditional male-dominated system is key to realizing the industry's full potential. And there are programs like the Women's Dairy Cooperative Leadership Program, or WDCLP, that are really actively working towards this change.
And what are some of their goals?
Well, the WDCLP was actually started back in 1995, and their focus is on empowering women to step up as leaders within these cooperatives. They offer training and resources, helping women develop the skills they need to not just manage businesses, but also become advocates for themselves and their communities.
Sounds like they're creating a whole new generation of leaders in the dairy industry.
Exactly. And remember, it's not just about economics. It's about social justice. It's about sustainability. And it's about ensuring that women have a real say in shaping the future of their communities. The positive impact of that increased income is undeniable. Better nutrition for families, greater access to education for girls, and just overall community development. It's a lot to get excited about.
It's incredibly inspiring, but let's be realistic for a second, too. I'm sure there are challenges that these women are up against as well, right?
You're absolutely right, there are. While the progress is encouraging, there are definitely still some hurdles to overcome. Well, for one thing, there's a real lack of policy support when you compare it to developed nations.
In what way?
Well, unlike in many Western countries, Indian dairy farmers don't get the same level of price assistance or milk quotas. or even export subsidies, which really puts them at a disadvantage in the global market.
It's like they're playing the same game, but with a totally different rule book. I can imagine how tough it is for them to keep up.
Yeah, it really is. And on top of that, there's this increasing pressure from large corporate farms.
Ah, I see.
These companies have a lot of resources and the infrastructure to produce milk at way lower costs, which makes it even harder for those small producers to stay competitive.
It's that classic David versus Goliath story. Except in this case, David is a woman, with a cow going up against these huge corporations. What other obstacles are there?
Infrastructure is another big one. A lot of rural areas in India lack basic things like roads and transportation, even processing facilities, the things you need for efficient milk production and distribution.
So even if they can produce high-quality milk, getting it to the market is its own challenge.
Exactly.
What about the environmental side of things?
That's definitely a growing concern. These low-yield dairy systems can mean a bigger carbon footprint, which is something India is really trying to tackle.
It's a good reminder that sustainability isn't just about the planet, but about systems that work economically and socially for the long haul.
You're absolutely right. And then you can't forget about things like food safety regulations. Meeting those standards can be a real challenge and costly, especially for these smaller producers who might not have the means to invest in, say, all the latest equipment or technology.
It sounds like these women are incredibly resourceful, though, and
Well,
resilient, facing all these hurdles with a lot of determination. But what can actually be done to help, to make things a bit easier for them and really allow them to thrive? Are there any solutions in sight?
there are. And some of them are being implemented with pretty good success, too. One really promising approach has been setting up special finance cells, specifically designed to support women entrepreneurs.
So giving them access to things like capital, loans, and financial services they may not have had access to before.
Exactly. And a lot of these finance cells are staffed by women, too. Women who really understand the unique challenges they face, which makes the whole thing a lot more accessible,
Well,
less intimidating.
it's about trust and support on their terms.
Yeah.
What other strategies are working?
Another one that's really exciting is the growth of marketing cooperatives,
I see.
specifically set up to help women entrepreneurs. These cooperatives can really help them get around those middlemen, giving them more control over prices and the profits they make.
So it's about that direct connection to the consumer, cutting out the go-between.
Exactly. And the government can play a huge role here, too. Imagine the impact if government contracts for milk and dairy, really prioritized those women-owned businesses.
That would be amazing. But what about resources? Things like feed, fodder, and veterinary care. Those must be hard to come by in some places.
You're right. Those are all critical. And thankfully, there are some initiatives working on this, actually prioritizing women entrepreneurs when it comes to those resources.
So it's about leveling the playing field, giving them the same shot as those larger producers.
That's the idea.
Yeah.
And then you can't forget about education and awareness either, especially when it comes to some of those traditional gender roles that can really hold women back.
So it's not just the practical stuff. It's about changing the mindset.
Absolutely. We need programs that really tackle those gender stereotypes and highlight how much women contribute. And those messages have to reach everyone, men, women, community leaders, the whole nine yards.
Fostering a sense of respect and equality where everybody has the chance to thrive.
Right. And education has to go beyond just changing attitudes, too. It's also about giving women the practical skills to succeed,
I see.
from animal care and breeding
Yeah.
to things like business management,
That's it.
financial literacy, leadership development, all of that.
A holistic approach that gives them the tools to run their businesses, top to bottom.
Exactly. And these programs need to be designed with flexibility, too, because women often have very limited time and family obligations to think about. Mobile training units, evening courses, even childcare options could all be a part of it.
It's about making it easier for them to take part, removing those barriers. What about technology? What role does that play in all this?
Oh, technology is a double-edged sword.
Hmm.
On the one hand, it has the potential to really empower these women.
How so?
Well, it connects them to information, markets, and financial services they couldn't access before. Things like mobile banking apps or online platforms where they can sell their dairy products directly.
It's opening up a whole new world for them.
It really is. But there's a flip side to it, too. The cost of getting some of those more advanced systems, like automated milking machines, can be too much for the smaller producers. And then there's the potential for job displacement. If technology starts replacing human labor, we've got to be mindful of that.
So it's finding that balance, harnessing what tech has to offer, but also protecting those livelihoods and making sure that these advancements are actually benefiting everyone.
Exactly. And there's a need for some bigger changes, too. Things like land inheritance reforms that address the inequality when it comes to land ownership. That would give women a lot more economic security.
It's not just about individual women, it's about changing those structures that keep that inequality going.
You got it. And then there's mentorship and networking, too. You can't underestimate the power of that. Connecting women with more experienced farmers, business leaders who can provide guidance and support.
It's creating a community where they can share their knowledge, learn from each other, and just find strength in those who've been there before.
Exactly. And the great thing is there are already so many inspiring examples of all these solutions being put into practice successfully, both in India and around the world.
And for those listening who are interested in diving a little deeper, we'll include links to some of those in our show notes. Wow, what a journey this has been, exploring this world of Indian dairy farming. Who knew that behind those images of, these vast herds and traditional practices, there's this incredible force of women driving the whole industry forward?
It's a real testament to their resilience, I think, and their entrepreneurial spirit. They're not just milk producers. They're business owners, community leaders. They're real agents of change.
It's been eye-opening for me to see just how interconnected all these issues are, too.
Hmm.
Economics, gender equality, environmental sustainability, they all come together in this one fascinating story.
And it just goes to show that when you see progress in one area, it can create these ripple effects that benefit the whole society. Empowering women in dairy farming, it's not just about, boosting milk production. It's about strengthening those families, those communities, and ultimately the entire nation.
It really is. So as we wrap up our deep dive here, what's the main takeaway for our listeners? What do you hope they'll walk away remembering?
For me, the biggest takeaway is this. Supporting women in Indian dairy farming, it's not just the right thing to do, ethically speaking. It's also a really smart investment in a more sustainable and prosperous future for everyone. Their success means greater food security, economic growth, and just better lives for everyone involved.
It's a good reminder that when you empower women, everybody benefits. Thank you so much for sharing all your insights with us today. It's been truly enlightening.
The pleasure was mine. I always enjoy these conversations. It's a chance to really dig deep into these important issues.
And to all our listeners out there, we encourage you to keep exploring this fascinating world. We'll be sure to include some links in our show notes to organizations doing some incredible work on the ground. Plus, we'll share some really inspiring stories about individual women who are making a difference in their communities through dairy farming.
Keep asking those questions, stay curious, and never stop learning. There's a whole world out there just waiting to be discovered.
Until next time, happy deep diving, everyone.